The 2024 college football season has concluded. My Ohio State Buckeyes have been named champions. So that means pretty much everyone at this point has declared for the draft that's going to, and we have a very good idea of who's going to be available in this draft, where teams are going to be picking. So we got another 2025 NFL mock draft here. Let's just go ahead and dive right into it. Starting off at pick number 1, the Tennessee Titans on the clock here. Definitely think that quarterback's in play, whether it's Cam Ward from Miami or Shedeur Sanders from Colorado. I think both of those guys are going to be in play for Brian Callahan and this Titans team. Bergonzi, they just hired as the GM. He did have a quote saying, "We're not going to pass on a generational talent just to take a quarterback," essentially. He could be talking about Travis Hunter, he could be talking about Abdul Carter, or it could just be a smokescreen to see, if a team will trade up for a quarterback and pay a ransom for it. In this case, though, I'm going to go with Abdul Carter, the edge rusher out of Penn State. First year as an edge rusher, moved from off-ball linebacker. His ability to win the outside edge with his electric speed and athleticism. He crosses face. It seems like a very lazy comparison because they went to the same school and wear the same number and essentially did the same thing in moving from off-ball linebacker to an edge rusher. But he definitely reminds me a lot of Micah Parsons and how he plays. He's not the biggest guy, but he just has ridiculous athleticism and explosiveness. I think Abdul Carter is going to be a very, very fun player and somebody that the Titans may not pass on with the number 1 overall pick. Number 2 for the Cleveland Browns. I think that quarterback also absolutely has to be in play here, and Deshaun Watson just has not been able to get it done. He has been terrible when he's been on the field, suffered an Achilles setback, so I think they're going to be in the quarterback market. Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders, kind of take your pick. For me, I would say Cam Ward, but I think the Browns would go with Shedeur Sanders here. Just kind of seems like their kind of quarterback. He's accurate. He maybe doesn't have the great pocket presence that I look for, and he's not, to me, a top 5 pick. But I think he's going to go in that range. And so I have the Browns going with Shedeur Sanders at number 2 here. And then that leaves number 3, the Giants. I think regardless of who's available, unless both the top 2 quarterbacks are gone, I think they'll take the other one. Joe Shane, Brian Dable coaching for their lives and, GMing for their lives as well. So I'm going to go with Cam Ward. He is a playmaker. He definitely puts the ball in harm's way too often, but he's a gunslinger. He has really good talent, and I think he's, to me, the best quarterback in this class, and somebody I think the Giants would like to get at number 3 there. Works out remarkably well for the Patriots at number 4. I do think that there would be a world where they just kind of take Travis Hunter or Abdul Carter, whichever one's there. I know they need offensive linemen, they need wide receiver. To me, Travis Hunter is probably best as a corner and playing like a wide receiver 3 number of snaps on offense. I think that he could be a full-time wide receiver and be worth this selection as well, but his versatility, his playmaking, his ball skills are all really, really special, and I think the Patriots would be very, very happy to get him at pick number 4. Then that moves to the Jaguars at number 5. I think they would be ecstatic to get Will Johnson here out of Michigan. I really think that he would be considered, one of the best players in this class. He's up there for sure, but he's definitely not talked about with Abdul Carter and, Travis Hunter and the quarterbacks. I think he's kind of seen as a tier below those guys, but without the injuries, I definitely think he could be in contention from just a pure talent perspective of being the best player in this class. For the Jaguars, Tyson Campbell's a good corner, but you absolutely need to add to the corner 2 room and, just get some more playmakers on the defensive side of the ball. They end up getting Liam Cohen, so it'll be interesting to see what the offense looks like with him at the helm, but I think Will Johnson makes a lot of sense for the Jaguars at number 5. And then we have the Raiders at number 6. Just hired Pete Carroll, which is a very interesting hire. I think that, he does bring a lot of energy, even if he is old. They don't really have a quarterback, and they don't have a means of getting a quarterback in this draft. I do not think you can take Jalen Milroe 6th overall. I don't think he's even remotely worth that talent. I think he absolutely needs to sit a year, maybe 2, to develop him. And the Raiders are not a good destination for that. So we're going to go with Tetairoa McMillan. Once you do eventually get a quarterback in that room, having McMillan and Brock Bowers and Michael Mayer and Jacoby Myers, that's a really good infrastructure for a young quarterback to come in. And, maybe next year they're able to go up and get their guy. But To me, you go get a playmaker, you continue to build the offense so that eventually once you do get your quarterback, you do have a really good system and infrastructure around him that he could be successful early on. Number 7, the Jets up next hired Aaron Glenn, the defensive coordinator for the Lions. So definitely I think they might be a little bit focused on the defensive side of the ball. There's gigantic question marks kind of on all over the offense. Will Aaron Rodgers be back? Is Garrett Wilson going to demand a trade? Will Devontae Adams be there? There's just question mark after question mark on offense. And, it's tough to answer that before free agency, before we kind of see what happens with a lot of those guys. But I think from a talent perspective, Mason Graham is the best player on the board here. And he also is a big position of need. You have Quinnen Williams, but being able to add Mason Graham to that, all of a sudden with Jermaine Johnson and Will McDonald, they have a really good defensive line, and it can be kind of the identity of this Aaron Glenn team and this defense as well. So I'm going to go with Mason Graham at number 7 for the Jets. And then the Panthers at number 8 up next. I think pass rusher definitely is kind of one of their big primary needs. And a guy that reminds me a ton of a guy that was really good for them, Brian Burns, is James Pierce Jr. out of Tennessee. He was kind of the consensus number 1 pick coming into the year. It was a lot based on potential because he had 13 sacks last year. Even if he only had 8 this year per PFF, I think he really showed a lot of growth. His ability to win laterally, counter with inside moves, use his hands more effectively. He has an amazing get-off. And to me, James Pierce Jr. has all of the traits to be a top 10 pick. I think Brian Burns is a very good comp for him, and they ended up trading him away. You kind of get a little Brian Burns clone here at pick number 8, so I think that makes a lot of sense for the Panthers. At number 9 up next for the Saints, to me, I think that they could add to the offensive line. I just don't think Trevor Penning has been great. The interior, Saldiveri and Eric McCoy and Cesar Ruiz are just not the strongest interior. I think McCoy is pretty good, but the other two, as well as Penning, is a big question mark. You could add wide receivers. Olave and Shaheed have not really proven to be able to stay healthy. You could add Tyler Warren as a tight ends, but I keep thinking that they're probably going to add to the defensive line. Cam Jordan's getting old. Carl Granderson really wasn't anything amazing. Brian Brzee definitely showed some flashes here and there, but he just wasn't great in my eyes. And so we're going to go with Mykel Williams out of Georgia, who is very much not the player I would take because I think he is incredibly raw. But I think there's a lot of arguments and similarities to a guy like Trayvon Walker, who also came out of Georgia, maybe wasn't put in the best situation to truly get after the passer and develop a lot of his abilities. He kind of played as more of a 4-eye on the inside shoulder of the tackle, wasn't really asked to wide rush like some of the other guys in this class, Abdul Carter, James Pierce Jr. So he just doesn't have quite the same skill set. He's really good against the run, but when you look at his traits, he's got vines for arms, he's really athletic, he showed ability to win the outside shoulder from time to time, to use power moves. He is completely underdeveloped. But for the Saints, maybe they're a team that isn't looking to compete this upcoming year, and they can get some playing time for him, allow him to develop, and then by year 3, when he's really coming into his own, maybe that's when the Saints are finally competing. So I think Mykel Williams would be an interesting pick. He's not who I would take, but ultimately I think he's going to go in the top 20 picks of this draft. So we have the Saints picking him up here at number 9. And then at number 10 for the Bears, you get the big guy in Ben Johnson. That is huge for this team, for this offense, for Caleb Williams. And you have some wide receiver talent. You've got DJ Moore, Rome Odunze. Keenan Allen's a free agent. But, the defense absolutely could use some work. But to me, Ben Johnson and the Lions built through the trenches offensively. And I think you have to go get a better interior offensive line. Or maybe you replace Braxton Jones at left tackle. Will Campbell is a guy who could play guard. He doesn't have very long arms, so he might be best at guard. If you do play him at tackle, I think you can, upgrade over Braxton Jones or move Braxton Jones inside, whatever it is. You can allow yourself to get the best 5 offensive linemen out there, and drafting a guy like Will Campbell allows you to do that. So I think that's huge for the Bears, and I think they'll be adding to the trenches. I could see them adding an edge rusher if they like one there, but the way the board fell, you can have your pick of any offensive lineman. I think the Bears go that way at number 10. At number 11 for the San Francisco 49ers, I think offensive line is absolutely in play here, and you could look at Calvin Banks, you could look at Josh Simmons. A guy who I think has done his stock wonders is Josh Connerly out of Oregon. He is a left tackle, started the last 2 years at left tackle, still very young. He's continuing to develop, but I think he has all the traits to be, a top 20 pick, a guy that really picks up steam in this draft process. And I really do think that there's a very good chance he goes a lot higher than people are projecting right now. He just turned 21 years old, 6'4", 315 pounds. He's a natural tackle. He moves well in space. He's athletic. I think that he is going to be a very interesting draft prospect and somebody that does go pretty high. I have the 49ers taking him to potentially be the heir apparent to Trent Williams at number 11 here. Number 12 for the Cowboys, they've not hired a coach, but likely either going to be, Schottenheimer or Kellen Moore. Regardless, it's not super inspiring hirings to me. I think Jerry Jones is going to want to go get Ashton Jeanty, and it's a position of need. Rico Dowdle's an upcoming free agent. Zeke was cut. They need a running back desperately, and Jeanty is a great player, so the fit makes sense. The need makes sense. A lot of people make that selection, and it's easy, but I ultimately think that's where he ends up. So we have him going to the Cowboys, and then the Dolphins at pick 13 could also absolutely have them take an offensive tackle, Kelvin Banks or Josh Simmons. But I think Malachi Starks is really tough to pass up at this point. Javon Holland, your other safeties on this roster have just not been great. So I think adding Malachi Starks, who is a guy who can be a true center fielder, man up tight ends, play with slot wide receivers. He's just very instinctual, has good speed, and good ball skills as well. So I think for the Dolphins at number 13 there, whether they lose Holland or not, it makes sense to add a safety like Starks to that back end of the defense. Number 14 for the Indianapolis Colts, we're going to go Tyler Warren out of Penn State. He's a guy that can really block incredibly well, which is huge for a Colts team that likes to run the football. But I also think that he is a monster in contested catch situations, yards after catch. He's the kind of guy that, if you can get design touch to him, or if you just let Anthony Richardson throw the ball up to him, he's absolutely going to be really effective for you. And for an offense that kind of sputtered a bit and was not really able to, manufacture a lot of yards and points, I think that Tyler Warren could be huge in, aiding in the development of Anthony Richardson and continuing to allow the offense to move the ball up the field and get those tough yards a little bit easier. Number 15 for the Atlanta Falcons. I think they have had a problem with pass rushing for a long time now, and they have not really been able to solve that problem. And, I think that they would take another pass rusher here. And I'm going to go with Shamar Stewart out of Texas A&M. To me, I like Mike Green better, but Shamar Stewart has crazy physical traits. He is, when you look at his body, 6'6", 290 pounds, and he's mostly a pure edge rusher. He's just 21 years old. He uses speed to power really effectively. He's got good athleticism for his size. He's somebody that, did play predominantly as an edge rusher at 290 pounds. He's a good run defender. To me, this is too high to take him for a guy that, hasn't produced more than 2 sacks a year at any point in his college career. But I think the NFL is going to love the traits and want to take a swing on a guy with this kind of physical attributes. So for the Falcons here, I ultimately think that's where they go at pick number 15. And then at 16 for the Cardinals, going to go with a guy who just kind of flies around the box and makes plays. And PFF, the rankings here, way lower on him. Jalen Walker out of Georgia. He's kind of a little bit of a tough player because he is not the most instinctual in coverage, most athletic. He's listed as an off-ball linebacker. He plays a lot on the defensive line, on the line of scrimmage. You can see, 249 snaps for him at defensive line. And he was really effective in his pass rush situations as a blitzer. You can see he was kind of just an off-ball linebacker a lot of the time as well. So he's kind of this hybrid front seven type of player that I think Jonathan Gannon would really like to be creative with. And when you allow him to come on stunts and loops and blitzes and things, that's where he is devastating. So I think Jalen Walker would be a really interesting player to kind of see within this scheme. At just 20 years old right now, he's got, a lot of traits and ways that he can continue to develop. So I think that'll be an interesting selection if that's what happens for the Cardinals at number 16. Then we move to the Bengals, who fired their defensive coordinator, Lou Anarumo, this offseason. They just hired Al Golden, who is the defensive coordinator for Notre Dame. And I think that maybe that is going to play a role in who they select. Golden is somebody that plays a lot of man coverage, and the Bengals don't really have great man corners. I mean, you have Dax Hill and DJ Turner, returning from injuries. You had high selections on both of those guys. Mike Hilton may or may not be leaving. I think Benjamin Morrison is absolutely going to be in play, and the Notre Dame connection certainly helps. Morrison was injured relatively early in this process, but he definitely came into the year as potentially a top 10 pick at 6 foot, 190 pounds. He's just 20 years old right now. He's a true junior. He, did miss the entire second half of the season, but I think Golden, if he likes Morrison, that could absolutely be a guy that he targets. And I think this defense as a whole, front to back, needs upgrading, whether it's defensive line. The way the board kind of fell, I think the value was maybe with Morrison at corner on the back end of this defense, and I don't think the Bengals would hesitate to select him at number 17. At pick number 18 for the Seattle Seahawks, I think the offensive line has to be the priority here. You have Charles Cross at left tackle, and he's a pretty good player for you, but whether it's Abraham Lucas's injuries or the terrible play you've gotten from the interior, really you can't be too picky on where you upgrade this offensive line because it's pretty much everywhere you can. And to me, Kelvin Banks is a really intriguing option. He played left tackle for Texas, which is where Charles Cross plays, but I think, due to his arm length and kind of his ability, I do think that there's a chance that he's best at guard anyway, but you could put him at right tackle. You could move Charles Cross, who knows, but you truly need to get the best 5 offensive linemen, kind of the same argument as the Bears. Having Kelvin Banks and Charles Cross shouldn't dissuade you from taking the talented player, and I think that's what the Seahawks ultimately do at number 18. And then for the Buccaneers up next, Mike Green out of Marshall, an incredibly intriguing player. He led the FBS in sacks this year with 17. He was just a monster when it came to bending around the edge, having just ridiculous explosiveness. Yes, he was playing Marshall, but he did it against Ohio State. He did it, against good teams that he faced as well. He just has such a wide range of pass rush moves. He can win with power. He's pretty decent against the run despite his size. So he's somebody I really, really like, and I think the Buccaneers would be incredibly happy to get. He was kicked off the Virginia team as a freshman, so that story has not really come out. That's definitely a wild card in where he goes, but based on the information we have, I do think he is going to be a first-round pick. For the Broncos at number 20, I am going to go with Colston Loveland, the tight end out of Michigan. I think that Loveland could provide just a big element to this offense and would be huge for Bo Nix. He's a great separator, and the terrible quarterback play he had at Michigan this past year definitely should not reflect how good of a player he is. He separates really effectively. He's good at running routes on crossers and all those kinds of things. He's reliably very open. Not much of a blocker, but he's the kind of guy that just creates so much separation, is a matchup nightmare for defenses. So I think adding him in the middle of the field would be huge for Bo Nix in this passing offense. And then for the Steelers up next, we're going to go wide receiver. I know the Steelers don't always go wide receiver in the first round. It's pretty rare that they do. But I think Luther Burden is the best player, available within this spot that really fits a major need. He is such a good yards after catch weapon. He kind of was an explosive downfield threat a bit more in 2023. He had bad quarterback play this past year. So once again, you can't really reflect the poor quarterback play on the player that's trying to receive the passes. He still had 676 yards, 6 touchdowns, a noticeable drop off from 2023, but I don't think he got any worse. It was just kind of the situation around him, and I think he would be a great addition to a Steelers offense that really, really needs some explosiveness and some ability in the passing game. And then at number 22 for the Chargers, both the tight ends are off the board. Those are very popular picks, Colston Loveland, Tyler Warren. So we are going to go a different direction here, and this might be a little bit of a contentious pick, but I'm going to take Omarion Hampton, the running back out of North Carolina. I think he fits so well what Harbaugh wants to do. He is just this big, bruising running back, and he is so difficult to bring down. His contact balance at 6'1", 220 pounds is really impressive. He's my RB2. I just think he's a good pass protector. He's got reliable hands out of the backfield. Just being able to take pressure off Justin Herbert and just bang out really tough yardage, I think Hampton is the perfect guy for this offense in the running game. So going to go with Hampton at number 22 there. And then at 23 for the Packers, I think they definitely need to add to the corner room. Probably moving on from Jair Alexander. The other guys in that room have just not been consistent at all. The Packers absolutely have big-time thresholds with the kinds of players, the athletic testing and scores, the measurables. Siobhan Ravel is an interesting player because he did get injured after 3 games this year, but he is really interesting. 6'3", 193 pounds. He has the length that the Packers tend to look for. I think he would meet their thresholds. He's a really interesting player. We'll see if he's able to do anything at the combine, work out at all, but he's an interesting player that I do think will probably go round 1 because of how good his tape has been the past couple of years. Even if he has missed time and may not be able to do a lot of testing, I think he's still going to sneak into the end of round 1. The Vikings up next. Running back has kind of been on the board. Corner definitely, but it's not a lot of corners I love. Now the Ravel's off the board. So I'm going to go with Kenneth Grant out of Michigan, who maybe doesn't always have the production that you're looking for, but as a guy who is a gigantic player, you look at his size, 6'3", 339 pounds. Not many guys that big move like Kenneth Grant. And he provides you some upside and some juice in the passing game. He's just 21 years old. He played next to Mason Graham. So, he certainly has had a guy to, teach him the ways and things like that. It's not like Mason Graham's any older than him, but he's just so good. And I think Grant is a really interesting player that even despite, he has 3 sacks, which is not bad at all for a nose tackle. He had 5 last year. His run stuffing is good, but it's not ridiculously productive. His stat line won't wow you. But I think the measurables and, a lot of the athletic traits are going to be really intriguing for a lot of NFL teams. At number 25 for the Texans, guard play has to improve. Kenyon Green has been atrocious. The offensive line in general has just been a complete disaster. And CJ Stroud showed, he needs a competent offensive line in front of him to be able to be successful. So I'm going to go with Armand Mimbu out of Missouri. He played right tackle for Missouri pretty much exclusively the past 3 years, but I think he absolutely could be an interior player if they decide to go that route. Right tackle position hasn't been, exactly the top amazing thing within the Houston roster. So if he can stick at right tackle, I don't think that's a bad thing at all. But I also think that he can play guard at 6'3", 314 pounds. He's very young at 20 years old. He was a rock for Missouri. And I think that, after watching some of his tape, I do think that he is going to be a first-round pick. And for the Texans, fills at a position of need. It allows you to get better on the offensive line regardless of where he plays. I think that makes a lot of sense. And then, kind of similarly, Josh Simmons out of Ohio State for the Rams. Simmons, I think, could have been a top 10 pick if he had stayed healthy this year. He tore his ACL in the middle of this season. Most likely, he'll be ready to go for, week 1 of the NFL season, but he's probably not going to be able to work out a whole lot. And there are some question marks with his medicals. So that's maybe what pushes him down the board a little bit here. I also wouldn't be at all surprised if he goes in the top 10 because his tape this past year for Ohio State was awesome. And I think at 26 for the Rams, the left tackle spot has not been great. You need to continue to prolong Stafford's career as long as you can. And I think taking Simmons makes a ton of sense at number 26. Next, we have the Ravens at number 27 here. I think they could add to the guard spot, the tackle spot. Ronnie Stanley not getting any younger. First time he's played a full season, and, he's not getting any younger at all. So I think Rosengarten's done a pretty decent job at right tackle, but I think they could continue to add to the spot. Wyatt Milam, I think, could either play left tackle, or I think he could be a really good guard. Great grip strength. Just look at his stats. 0 sacks, 0 hits allowed, just 6 hurries in 2024. Was really good in the running game as well. So I think Wyatt Milam is going to be a guy that's maybe a quiet first-round pick, but really, really effective for the team that ends up selecting him. Then at number 28 for the Detroit Lions, I'm going to go with Jack Sawyer out of Ohio State. To me, he's a perfect number 2 edge rusher to pair with Aiden Hutchinson. His just ability to turn it on in the playoffs for Ohio State was remarkable. He ended up with 10 sacks. A lot of those were not, early wins and stuff, but he's a great run defender. He's a guy that plays with maximum effort. He's a leader. He's incredibly tough. I do think that Sawyer is going to, potentially sneak into the first round. I think he'll be right in that conversation. But for the Lions, I just think it makes so much sense to add him as a number 2 rusher. He does all of the little things right, and pairing him with a guy who looked like the defensive player of the year and, an elite edge rusher in Aiden Hutchinson last year, I think would make a lot of sense for him. Next, the Commanders at number 29. Going to go Emeka Egbuka out of Ohio State. Jaden Daniels has done remarkable things with this team with Terry McLaurin and not a whole lot else in the wide receiver room. Zach Ertz has been one of his top receivers, and I think that if you continue to add talent around Jaden Daniels, this could be a really, really special offense. And Egbuka is just an incredibly high floor guy. He's just somebody that runs really good routes, To me, the Amon-Ra St. Brown comp that gets thrown around is a little ambitious for me, but I think that he's the same type of player where you just know where he's going to be. He's ultra consistent. He's a good route runner. He's not selfish. He'll just, do what's asked of him. He's a pretty decent blocker. I think Ibuka is a really, really interesting player and I think fits really well within the Commanders. To be that number 2 receiver behind Terry McLaurin, I think it just fits like a glove there at number 29. And then at number 30 for the Buffalo Bills, I also think this makes a lot of sense. It's the third Ohio State player in a row, but Tyleik Williams out of Ohio State, he was the nose tackle for this team, and he's not great when it comes to his pass rush. He's not bad at it for a defensive tackle, but really where he thrives is taking on double teams, eating space, eating gaps, two-gapping, and just being such a rock against the run. And I think when you have Ed Oliver, who is an undersized 3-tech, you've got to have a pure nose tackle that can eat up multiple blocks, two-gap, be just dominant against the run. And that's exactly what Tyleik Williams is. So continuing to get tougher against the run, and I think that makes so much sense for them at number 30. The next pick here, at pick number 31, definitely does not go with PFF's board, but I think he is going to really climb up this board. And it is a guy, Braden Swinson, out of LSU. 157th according to PFF's board, but if you watch his tape, he is not the 157th best player in this draft. He has 9 sacks. He's somebody that had a 22.1 pass rush win rate. He was decent against the run. That's not where he thrives. But as kind of that true pass rusher, the guy that can win with speed outside. But I also think he has some power to his game. He's long enough. He's not huge, but at 6'4", 250 pounds, he's playing big. And he's a guy that, he's more of that 3-4 outside linebacker type, so it fits the Eagles' defense. It fits their mold. I think Swinson is going to be, a guy that's in the conversation for late day 1, early day 2, and I think he will shoot up draft boards. Then at number 32 for the Chiefs, they need to continue to add to the pass rush, and Nick Gordon seems like their kind of player. I think he's definitely fallen down boards for kind of decent reason. He just hasn't played amazing football this past year. I think he was much better at Purdue in 2023 before he transferred. I think that, he hasn't shown a lot of finesse ability, but he reminds me a little bit of George Karlaftis, who is, a high effort player. He has decent strength and IQ, and, he just was able to really put it together with this Chiefs team. So I think it makes a lot of sense to kind of emulate that same type of pick. 6'4", 285 pounds. He's big. He's strong against the run. He's just 20 years old. So they can continue to develop him. And I think it makes a lot of sense for them at number 32. So that's going to do it for this iteration of the 2025 NFL mock draft. We're going to come up with our top 10 edge rusher rankings next. So let me know what your thoughts are on this mock draft. Please hit that subscribe button so you don't miss all kinds of 2025 NFL draft content, player reports, position rankings, mock drafts, all that kind of stuff. You won't want to miss it. Thank you so much for watching. I will catch you in the next one.